Welcome, I'm Dragon, and now that the month of August is over, I now have 31 quick tips. So I decided I'd make a video where I compile them all, and that's this video. They are all mostly the whole video, other than the beginning and ends have a little bit cut off, so you don't have to watch the intros and outros. Well, other than that, enjoy these quick tips, and by the way, there are timestamps below. And here's 6 ways to move the 3D cursor in Blender for today's quick tip. Number 1, hit the 3D cursor icon, which will allow you to drag to move it, or to click to move it. Number 2, shift right click. This will allow you to drag to move it or click to move it, but you need to keep holding those keys for as long as you want to move the cursor. I still think it's better than the icon. Number 3, shift C. We'll put the cursor at world origin along with making sure your objects are in view, which is actually kind of a pain sometimes. Number 4, shift S for cursor selection menu. In this menu, I personally find cursor to selected most useful, but there are other options. Number 5, N for sidebar, then go to view and change values under where it says 3D cursor. Personally, not my favorite because it's manual. Number 6, in edit mode you can go right click and move down to snap vertexes, then it will show cursor, and then there's a couple of options that you can choose to move the 3D cursor. Bonus, if you just hate the 3D cursor, you can go to viewport overlays and hit 3D cursor. That would make it so you can't see it anymore. By the way, it's still there though. And here's 4 ways to move the origin point in Blender for today's quick tip. Number 1, simply click the model, then right click, then scroll down to set origin, then you have a couple of options. Choose whichever one you think would work best for you. Number 2, this is basically a copy of the last one, other than it's a different way to get to it. So go to Object, Set Origin, and then you have the same options as the last one. Number 3, go to Options and under Transforms, Effect Only, Origins. Now if you select the cube and hit G, then you can move around the origin. You can also do this by hitting Y, X, and Z, so you basically have full control of moving the origin. To stop moving the origin, go to Options and uncheck the Effect Only Origins. Number 4, hit N and go to the sidebar, and then go down to Tools and Effect Only Origins. So basically the same as the last one, other than in a different location. And here's some basic shortcuts in Blender for beginners for today's quick tip. First, S to scale, R to rotate, and G to move. And with any one of these, you can use X to lock it on the X-axis, Y to lock it on the Y-axis, and Z to lock it on the Z-axis. Next up, Shift A to add things. For example, mesh and monkey. Then there's X to delete. To duplicate this monkey, you can go Shift D, and now you have 2 of them. But you can also do it with Command C and then Command V for copy and paste. Either way works fine. I just find Shift D to work better because it's a simpler shortcut. Now that we have a little army of monkeys, how do you select them all? Well, you just hold Shift while you select them and you're able to get them all. Or you can use box select by holding down on the left click button and dragging. You can also hit B and drag if you like that better. And now W is for different selection menus. The first one is a round one where you kind of just scroll over them and select as many as you can, and I would increase the radius unless you have a really small object. The next one is a drag. You can drag around an object to select them all. The next one is like the standard one, other than if you select an object, then you can move it without having to hit G. But it's also a little more finicky. If you just want to select them all, then you can hit A to select everything in the scene. You can also hit Option A to deselect everything, or you can just click somewhere not on an object. And H is to hide the object, and then Option H is to bring it back, or Alt H if you're on Windows. And N is for the sidebar, so that you can access a variety of different tools. And now for the final one, this is one that I learned semi-recently, but I really like it. If you hit the backslash button, it will zoom you into the object and hide all the rest of them, so that you can work with just that object. And hit backslash again to get back into normal view. And today I'm going to show you some fun Blender viewport tips for today's quick tip. Let's get into it. Number 1, Shift tilde is for a similar view as a video game goes in. So you move with WASD, and down is Q and up is E. And while you're in this view, you can look at something and hit space and you teleport to that area. You can also speed up the movement by holding Shift or you could slow it down by using Option/Alt on Windows. You can also make your viewport enable gravity by hitting G. With gravity enabled, you can hit V to jump. It's not very high, but it is still jumping. And if you want even more control, then you can go to Edit, Preferences, and Navigation. And finally, if you want to do this in camera view, then you can by hitting Shift Spacebar to get into a similar video game movement. And today's quick tip is about the Extrude tool. Let's go! To use the Extrude tool, you hit E, and then you can extrude on either a vertex, edge, or face. But sometimes this doesn't always work for what you want. So there is more Extrude tool options by going Option E or Alt E on Windows. And this brings up an Extrude tool panel where you have multiple options. Most notably, extrude along normals, which actually extrudes them out in the same direction that they were going, which is very useful in certain occasions. The next one is extrude along individual faces, and as you can see in this example, they all kind of separate, which is awesome. And the final one worth noting is extrude along vertexes. As you can see, it literally does that, and if you scale them outward, it's kind of cool. And today's quick tip will be on the knife tool and the bisect tool. Let's go! The easiest way to activate the knife tool is by hitting K in edit mode. Then you can click around on the surface of the model and hit enter or return when you're done. But for some tips with the knife tool, you can hold shift to ignore snapping. Typically it will snap to the vertex if you don't hold shift. But if you want it to snap to the center of it, then you can hold control. And if you hit Z, then you can cut through the mesh. And if you hit C, then it will allow you to cut on angles, so either a 45-degree angle or a 90-degree angle. And if you hit E, then it will allow you to stop cutting and then cut again when you start clicking again. Now bisect. If you go to the sidebar panel and hold knife cut, and then you will find bisect, or you can go to mesh bisect. Bisect will allow you to cut your model in half, and if you go down to the bottom left, then you can see a couple more options such as fill. And today I will be talking about the offset edge loop cut and the loop cut for today's quick tip. Let's go! Okay, so to use the loop cut, you go into edit mode and Command R. And if you want more loop cuts before you click, then scroll up. Or you can go into the side panel and increase the loop cuts or decrease them. And then as you can see, there's a smoothness feature, which just allows it to kind of indent it or create an outward indent. And the factor just moves it to side, and then there's also a fall off, which has changed the smoothness type. There's also an even button, and that literally makes the shape of the loop cut into the one direction, and flipped goes the opposite direction. Now to offset edge loop cut. The hotkey for this is Shift Command R. To get this to work, you have to have some edges selected, and then you hit the hotkey and slide them apart. It basically creates two loop cuts on either side of the one loop cut. Well, for today's quick tip, I'm going to talk about the bevel tool. This is a surprisingly large amount that I didn't know about before doing this video, but either way, let's get into it. Number 1, to use the bevel tool is Command B. Number 2, scroll on the mouse wheel for more bevel segments, or hit S and do it manually by moving the mouse a little ways away from the cube. Number 3, M changes the width type. You can see what the width type is by going down to the bottom left and opening the panel and seeing where it says width type, and you can change it from there to what you want. Number 4, Shift slows down the bevel movement. Number 5, P allows you to change the shape of the bevel by moving the mouse. Number 6, if you go down and add another material and go to viewport shading, then you can do the bevel tool, and when you bevel it, you can see that there is a material index that shows a few numbers. When you increase the numbers, you can see that it actually applies a different material where you beveled it, which is kind of cool. Number 7, C will stop overlapping when using the bevel tool. Number 8, N will cut out an area where the vertexes meet. So here's an example. Yeah, pretty cool. Number 9, Z will take you to the custom bevel type, which is flat on default, but you can change this by going down to the bottom left, opening up the bevel panel, and going down to where it says custom, and then you can click on the curve and kind of turn it a little bit to create a more custom bevel. Number 10, the last and final one for this video, is Shift Command B is bevel vertex. But you can also do this when you hit Command B and then you hit V to do the same effect. And today's quick tip will be on the Inset tool in Blender. Here we go. Number 1, you can use inset faces in a few different ways, but all require you be in edit mode. You can do this either by selecting a face and hitting I, or selecting a face and going to the toolbar and finding inset faces and clicking on it, or by going to face and inset faces. Number 2, B will enable boundary while using inset faces. What it does is make the inset go up to the edge of the face when you're missing a face, but this also works when using the mirror modifier. Number 3, offset even. It will try and get a more even thickness, typically improving the inset. Number 4, offset relative. It tries to scale the offsets by the lengths of the surrounding geometry, so here's an example of it. It's kind of strange. Number 5, depth. It literally adds depth to it by either going inward or outward. Number 6, if you hit I to inset and then O, it will create an outset instead of an inset. Basically, an outset goes outward and an inset goes inward. Number 7, select outer literally selects the outer part of the inset. Number 8, individual insets. So you could do this by selecting a whole bunch of faces and then hitting I and then hit I again, and you'll have a whole bunch of individual insets. And if you're wondering about interpolate, that just improves the UVs, so I'd leave it on. For today's quick tip, we will be taking a look at the PolyBuild tool in Blender, a tool mainly introduced for retopology. Unfortunately, you can't access the tool with a hotkey, so to use it, go to the toolbar and manually click it. And because this is mainly used for retopo, I got a plane, mirrored it, and enabled snapping and tweaked a few settings. The PolyBuild tool has 3 main features. Click to extrude, hold Shift to delete a plane, and my personal favorite, hold Control to grab a vertex and create a plane. And by the way, the PolyBuild tool does not limit functions like G to move, R to rotate. You can still have it selected while you're doing these functions. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you find this tool useful. And by the way, this troll was modeled as my very first character sculpt, so if you want to check that video out, then you can click it in the top right corner. And today's quick tip is all about the spin tool. After you are in edit mode, you can use the spin tool by going to the toolbar or Option E and clicking spin. This is Alt on Windows. The spin tool spins around the 3D cursor, so when you move the vertex away in edit mode and use the spin tool, it creates a circle. When I open the panel in the bottom left, I have a few options. I can change the steps, use duplicates, which just removes the edges when you spin, change the angle, which is more useful when using the toolbar method of spinning because you typically want 360 degrees, which is what the hotkey method does automatically. There's also auto merge, which merges the vertexes when 360 degrees. And finally, you can adjust the position after the spin. When spinning with the toolbar, you have X, Y, and Z that you can click and spin around the axis. By the way, selecting all the vertexes will spin around all the vertexes. Today's quick tip is about the Smooth tool. To use the Smooth tool, go into edit mode and make sure you have a few vertexes. Then in the toolbar, there's Smooth. Use it by dragging, then there's a menu with different options. The smoothing value is how much it's affecting the smoothing. The value will stop dragging at 1 but can be typed higher up to 10. Repeating will repeat the smoothing value until the maximum value, which is 100. The different axis options allow the axis to not have an effect if it is clicked. Randomize, gotten by holding down the Smooth tool option in the toolbar and selecting Randomize. The tool is basically the Smooth tool but random. The amount is the distance the vertexes are moved. Uniform changes how the amount is affected. Normal is basically uniform. And Seed changes how it's randomized. Today's quick tip is Edge Slide and Vertex Slide. Access them by either in the toolbar or by hitting GG. For Vertex Slide, if you can't find it, you can hold Edge Slide in the toolbar, then click Vertex Slide. These tools allow you to slide edges or vertexes along a mesh. E will match the shape of an edge, more useful in Edge Slide, and if you hit F with E already clicked, it will flip to match the other edges. This can also be toggled in the side menu as even and flipped. The factor in the side menu is how much it's being slid, also able to be seen actively using the tool in the top left-hand corner. Now clamping, which is turned on by default, but can be turned on with C, side menu, or temporarily turned off with Alt. Basically, with it turned off, you can go over the normal factor. For example, you can type 10 into the factor instead of the normal max, which is 1. Personally, I really see this useful only in vertex slide. And finally, correct UVs does exactly that. It corrects the UVs. Today's quick tip is the shrink or fatten and push and pull tools. For shrink and fatten, find it either on the toolbar or with the hotkey Option S. Or you can also find it under Mesh Transform and Shrink and Fatten. So what does it do? Well, it really does just shrink and fatten objects by scaling along the normals. In my opinion, this tool is awesome for 3D printing because it allows you to make tolerances in 3D models easier than the alternative ways of doing it. Now to push and pull. You can either find it in the toolbar hidden behind Shrink/Fatten or under Mesh, then Transforms. And you can also find it in object mode under Object and then Transforms. This tool basically pushes objects together and away from each other if you know what you're doing. And it allows you to do it without having to do it the manual way. The most important thing to know about this tool is it works depending on what transform pivot point you're currently using. Personally, I find the 3D cursor pivot point most useful because it allows for the most control. And that does it. Today's quick tip is all about the shear tool. To use it, it's under the toolbar and under Object in Object mode, Mesh in Edit mode, Curve in Edit mode with a curve, and Surface in Edit mode with a surface object. Then with any of these four, go under Transform, then you'll see Shear. You can also use the hotkey Shift Command Option S. Now, what to do? Well, it makes parallel surfaces move past each other. It also works based on what the pivot point is. Now in the side menu, Offset is the distance, Axis is the axis of the shearing plane, Axis Orthographic is the other axis of the shearing plane, Orientation will change the orientation depending on what it is currently set as, and finally proportional editing will make the shearing less harsh depending on the size, how much geometry, and the proportional fall off. Oh, by the way, 2-sphere gotten under the toolbar hidden behind shear or Mesh Transform 2-sphere, and the hotkey is Shift Option S. Might very well be the weirdest tool ever. It allows you to really turn anything into a sphere, like a monkey. Honestly, turning a cube into a sphere would be more useful. Today's quick tip is all about ripping. There are 3 ripping tools in Blender: Rip Region, Rip and Fill, and Rip Edge. Rip Region you can find in the toolbar or Vertex, then Rip Vertices, and the hotkey is V. And as you can see, it duplicates the vertex or edge selected and creates a hole. Rip and Fill is found by Vertex, Rip Vertices, and the hotkey is Option/Alt on Windows, V. It does a similar function as Rip Region other than it fills the hole it creates. And now finally, Rip Edge. This tool is in the toolbar hidden behind Rip Region, but can also be found with Vertex, Rip Extend, and the hotkey is Option D. This tool duplicates the vertices and connects the rip to another vertices, in other words, creating bad geometry. With all these tools, there's a sidebar that has 3 options: a way to move the vertex or vertices in a specific way, a way to choose how the rip is oriented, and proportional editing, which is always nice to have on these sorts of tools. Today's quick tip is all about the measurement tools. There's the Viewport Overlays measurement tool in Edit mode, which has 4 useful measuring tools. If any of these 4 options are enabled, it will show the measurement or area for whatever edge or face is selected. Then there's the Standard measuring tool found in both Object and Edit mode in the toolbar. This will allow you to create a ruler. While using the ruler and holding Control, snapping will be turned on, which will snap to both vertices and edges. While holding Shift, you'll be able to measure how thick an object is. It will measure the thickness based on the face you're hovering the measuring ruler over. X will delete a ruler, and finally, if you click in the middle of the ruler, you'll be able to measure angles. For today's quick tip, let's talk about Bridge Edge Loops. You can access this tool under Edge in Edit mode or by Fn F3 and search for it, and Command E, then click Bridge Edge Loops. The main uses for this tool include making holes, filling gaps, and making wacky shapes. To make this tool work, you just need to have at least 2 edges selected. Now to the side menu. First up, connect loop types. Open loop will not make a full loop, while closed loop will make a full loop. Loop pairs will help if you want to bridge multiple edge loops at the same time. Merge will merge the vertices at the center, but you can change that with the merge factor. 0.5 is at the middle, so you can do 1 to go to the one end, and 0 to go to the other one. Twist will twist the object. Number of cuts will add more geometry where you are using the bridge edge loops. The interpolation, smoothness, and profile shape will all affect the shape of the bridge edge loop, but you need to add at least one cut to be able to see it. The more cuts you have, the more it will show how it's being shaped. And finally, the profile factor. This will determine how much the profile shape will affect the bridge edge loops. Today's quick tip is about poke faces. You can access this tool in 3 places: under Face in Edit mode, right-clicking while in Face Select, and by Control F for Specials menu. When this tool is used, it turns the quad to triangles and puts a vertex in the center. But this doesn't just work with quads, it will work with any face, so basically it would just put a vertex in the center and connect it to the other vertexes. Now to the side menu. Offset allows you to move the center vertex inward or outward. Offset Relative scales the offset by the surrounding geometry according to the built-in Blender tip, but basically it just changes the offset. Poke Center has 3 options, and they determine where the center vertex is. This is mainly useful if you're using poke faces on a quad that's not a perfect square, which is why I was using a sphere for the example. It didn't have a perfect square quad. Overall, I really only see this tool useful when making grips or making cool designs on something like a vase. Oh, and yes, I did make this vase using poke faces. Today, it's time for the annotation tool. If you hold down on the pencil icon, you will see there's 4 different annotate tools. The standard annotate tool is perfect if you're just wanting to draw or make notes. The annotate line is a more precise tool that does exactly what it says. It draws straight lines. Annotate polygon creates perfectly straight lines, and to finish using it, hit return. And finally, the eraser erases the lines. For more options, hit N on the keyboard and go to Tool. If you click on what says Note, you can change the color, thickness, opacity, and are even able to add and delete layers. Then where it says Placement, you can choose where it will draw it. 3D Cursor will be where the 3D cursor is, View will stay in your viewports, which is kind of cool, and Surface, my personal favorite, will allow you to draw directly onto your objects. If you check Stabilize Stroke, it will make it smoother to draw, and the factor and the radius both affect how much it will stabilize your stroke. You can also access all of these tools other than Stabilize Stroke above the viewport. Today's quick tip is all about the render region and clipping region tools. You can find both of these tools under View, then View Regions, but first let's take a look at render region. The hotkey is Command B, and this tool is really only for cycles to help speed it up while checking your model, and as you can see, it allows you to limit how much you view, which is why it speeds up cycles. What's also nice about this tool is it works for the camera too. So if you're in camera view and enable this tool, it will only render that specific spot. And by the way, going into edit mode before you disable the tool is a little wacky. And if you're wondering how to disable the tool, it is Option Command B. Now clipping region. The hotkey is Option B, both to enable it and to disable it. This tool only works in the viewport shading, but what it does is pretty cool. It basically allows you to see the inside of your model, in my case a car, by cutting the model. Here's how to make Blender have a maximized area and or fully full screened. You can do this by either going into View, then Area, and either toggling Maximized Area or Full Screen. Maximized Area will have the option to go back to previous, but you can also use the hotkey Control Spacebar to either leave the maximized area or to go into it. What's cool is if you use the hotkey method, it will also allow you to choose what area you want to maximize by maximizing the area your mouse is hovering over at the time you use the hotkey. Now for the full screen option. Option Command Space is the hotkey to enter full screen and to leave full screen mode. And finally, if you're on Mac like me, you have to go into Keyboard, then Shortcuts, and finally Spotlight to disable Show Finder Search Window. The reason for this is it uses the same hotkey as maximizing the screen. Today's quick tip is about the splitting tools in Blender. Just to clarify, this is not ripping or separating a mesh into a different object. Find these tools by either Mesh, then Split, Option M, or with the hotkey Y. The hotkey option is only for the standard tool. The standard splits tool will be able to split selected vertices, edges, and faces, but in order to actually see that it is split, you will have to move it away. Now to the split faces by edges option. This one is sort of like the rip tool in that it can create a hole. Here's an example of split faces by edges compared to the rip tool. Now the faces and edges by vertices. Basically, if a face is selected, all the vertices that are connected to another face or edge will be duplicated. If used on the top face of a cube and moved away, this is similar to as if you manually ripped each edge.
The mama alligator over there on her nest.
Today's quick tip is about merging vertices. Find merging options under Mesh, then Merge, or right-click, then down to Merge, or with the hotkey M. Under the Merge panel, there's a few different merge options. The first one is at center, which, if multiple vertexes are selected, will merge at the center. Then at cursor. This will move the vertices to the 3D cursor and merge them. You can also just move one vertex to the 3D cursor and not merge anything if that's what you want. Collapse will merge vertices at center, but for every island there will be an extra vertice. At first, we'll merge with the first vertex selected, and at last, we'll merge with the last one selected. And now to my favorite, merge option, by distance. This will merge any vertices that are overlapping with other vertexes. So for example, say you use the splitting tool, but didn't move it and forgot you had even used it. So now you have overlapping vertices, and if you use by distance, it will remove those extras. This is very useful when using Shade Smooth and for 3D printing, which is why I use this tool a lot. Today's quick tip is about Subdivide. You can find it either under Edge, Subdivide, Command E for Edge menu, right-click, then Subdivide, or right-click S for the hotkey. This tool will subdivide edges and faces. In the side menu, Number of Cuts is just that. Smoothness uses the added geometry to make the shape more smooth, similar to the subdivision modifier. Create N-gons will allow triangles to be made when subdividing something like an edge. Quad corner type will change how two edges creating a corner are subdivided. Fractal will move the vertices in random directions. Along normals will move along the normals instead of random directions. And finally, random seed will change the patterns of the fractal. Final things to mention is if subdivide is used on a triangle, there will be lots of smaller triangles versus the standard quads. And if you want the subdivide to go over 10, you'll have to type it in instead of dragging it along. And today's quick tip is about join and separate. Find join in either an object, then join, or with the hotkey Command J. This will join objects together and is used all the time. Now, separate. Separate can be found under Mesh, Separate, or with the hotkey P in the edit mode. For separate, there's 3 options. The standard separate option will separate whatever is selected. By material will separate anything that has a different material. And finally, loose parts will separate anything that isn't totally connected to the mesh. For example, the Suzanne monkey isn't connected completely, so those parts get separated, specifically the eyes. And today's quick tip is about flipping and recalculating normals. These tools are very useful when either 3D printing or exporting to use in a game. First, to even see what direction your normals are facing, in the first place you can turn on face orientation in the viewport overlays, and red is what you typically want inside your mesh for 3D printing and for game objects. Blue is typically what you want on the outside of your mesh. To flip them, you can either go to Mesh, then Normals and Flip, or Option N and then Flip. This would do as it sounds. It will flip the normals. But sometimes you don't want to just flip the normals. You want only the red ones or only the blue ones outside. So you can use Recalculate Normals. Recalculate Normals is useful when you don't want to select what faces you want to flip, either inside or outside. This will flip all the faces either inside or outside depending on what you choose. These tools are found in Mesh, then Normals, Option N, and the individual hotkeys are Shift-N for Recalculate Outside and Shift-Command-N for Recalculate Inside. Recalculate Inside is when the faces will be red outside the mesh, and Recalculate Outside is when the faces will be blue on the outside. Sometimes this doesn't always work. In that case, you'll need to manually use the Flip tool. Today's quick tip is all about the fill tools in Blender. F is the standard fill tool that fills the face, but doesn't add any edges or vertices. The next fill tool is found under Face and Fill, Control F, then Fill, or with the hotkey Option F, which is Fill, but will make faces triangles. Conveniently, this option will also not fill a hole if it's between the other vertices you're trying to fill, whereas the standard fill tool will. Now for the final fill tool, Grid Fill, found under Face, Control F, and the hotkey is Control F, G. This tool will fill faces and keep the geometry quads, but in order for it to work, you will need even vertices. In the side menu, you can also change the span, which will increase or decrease the amount of vertices. And there's an offset value, which will change how it's connected. Final thing to mention with this tool is that it can follow curves well. And today's quick tip is all about the viewport overlays. The viewport overlays are what you can and cannot see. For example, the grid floor is part of the viewport overlays, which you can turn off if you click the viewport overlays. Typically, I turn it off when I want to do a viewport render. By the way, viewport renders do not work with cycles. If you click the drop-down arrow connected to viewport overlays, you will find there's other options that you can turn on, but you can also turn these individual things off if you want. A cool option is wireframe, which will show wireframe in object mode. And a useful option is face orientation, which will show you what direction the faces are oriented. If you go into edit mode, you will also find even more options, particularly the measurement tools and the normals option. Normals will allow you to see how the normals are rotated, and the measurement tools will show you what lengths or area your objects are. Today's quick tip is about viewport shading. There are 4 standard shading options. Wireframe, which in the drop-down menu will have color with either single, object, or random. There's also a background, which we'll cover later, and you can turn off wireframe and outline if you want to. Now solid. Under the drop-down, there's lighting options like studio, matcap, and flat. If you click the ball in any of these, you can choose how you want it to look. Now there's the color options, but most notably, random, which will make each object a random color. Now to background. You will have a theme, world, and viewport option. Viewport will allow you to choose the background color. And finally, there's some other options like shadow, cavity, and some other smaller ones. Now to material preview. In this dropdown, you can choose how the lighting works. And if you disable scenes world, it will also have a background which you can choose the strength, opacity, and blur. Now finally, render preview, you will have the same options as material preview. So if you want to set how you want it to render, you can do this. Just note, it won't include the background. Well, there we have it. Thanks for watching these quick tips, and I'll see you in the next one, which should be next Thursday. And yes, I should be getting back to my normal upload schedule, as long as school doesn't mess that up. Well, thanks for watching, and bye!